I went to a dinner at my son's house and, upon arriving, overheard my daughter-in-law whispering to him, "Ugh, that annoying old lady is here." I pretended not to hear and maintained my composure all night. At the end of the dinner, I took some papers out of my purse, slowly tore them in front of everyone, and left without saying a word. Later, she called me crying. For God's sake, what were those papers? The lesson I gave that night was unforgettable. My heartbeat, once a calm and steady rhythm, now hammered in my ears, a frantic drum solo of fear and contained anger. My name is Eleanor, a soft melody rarely heard outside my most intimate circles. And at 70, I carry my life with an understated elegance, a veil of refinement that I believed shielded me from the world's harsh edges. My hair, always impeccably styled in a classic chignon, and my posture, erect and dignified, are a reflection of decades of an upbringing that valued kindness and respect above all else. My second nature is a quiet generosity, a deep desire to extend a hand without seeking acknowledgement, hoarding the secrets of my small, kind deeds like treasures. But, life has its ironies. My greatest flaw, the one that follows me like a shadow, is an extreme sensitivity to the words of others. Every comment, every cruel insinuation strikes me like a dagger to the heart, leaving wounds that are slow to heal. For months, a silent conflict has haunted me, a painful premonition that my presence in the life of my son, my only child, Michael, had come to be seen not as a support, but as a burden. Ever since he married Jessica, I feel as if I've been walking on eggshells, each step hesitant, every word weighed and reweighed, in a desperate attempt to prove I deserve a place in their new family dynamic. The fear of being an inconvenience has become my constant companion, a cold shadow that lengthens with every visit. That Thursday afternoon, an afternoon that promised to be like any other, I made my way to my son's apartment for our weekly dinner. It was a tradition we had established, a small ritual I cherished, hoping to keep the flame of our closeness alive. As I rode the elevator up, the aroma of home-cooked spices and the muffled sound of laughter from inside the apartment already wafted into the hallway, painting a welcoming picture in my mind. The doorbell chimed softly under my light touch. As I waited, my breath held in anticipation. A distinct, unmistakable sound reached my ears, piercing through the door. And then, a voice, the voice I knew so well, my daughter-in-law's voice, made my blood run cold. "Ugh, the old hag is here. She's so clingy, it's unbearable." The words, oh, those words, they hit my chest like a violent punch, stealing the air from my lungs. The world around me seemed to spin, reality distorting into a blur. For months, I had noticed her impatient glances, the forced smiles, the way she would look away when I spoke. But never, in my worst nightmares, did I imagine her aversion to me was so profound, so cruel, so blatant. The door swung open, and there she was, with that smile, now unmasked, a false smile that I finally understood in its entirety. "Eleanor, so good to see you," she said with a saccharine sweetness, a dissonant melody that made me nauseous. I stepped inside, my body feeling heavy, every fiber of my being carrying the weight of those words that had shattered my heart. I tried to maintain my composure, a monumental challenge as my entire world collapsed internally, silently. During dinner, every gesture of hers became a cruel spectacle to my eyes, every look exchanged with my son, who seemed completely oblivious to the storm brewing, every sigh of impatience disguised with a forced smile, was an arrow that struck me. Michael, with the innocence that had always characterized him, spoke animatedly about his workday, his eyes shining with enthusiasm, while I, inside, died a little more with each passing second. Her motive was clear, painfully clear. She wanted me out of their lives, out of my son's life, to have total control without the interference of the inconvenient mother-in-law. She saw me as an obstacle, and I, like a fool, was only now seeing the full extent of her plan. When we finished the main course, I rose from the table with a calmness that surprised even myself, a forced, yet unshakable, serenity. "Excuse me," I murmured, my voice a thin but steady thread. I took a few folded papers from my purse, documents I had been carrying for weeks, waiting for the right moment to gift them to my son, a secret of love and hope. It was meant to be a moment of celebration, an act of affection, but now the intention was different. "What a shame," I murmured again, this time looking directly into her eyes, not flinching. No emotion was visible on my face, but a whirlwind raged in my chest with deliberate, slow, almost ceremonial movements. I tore each document into small, meticulous pieces, feeling the paper give way under my fingers. The fragments fluttered down onto the dirty plates, like macabre confetti, scattering across the table, silent witnesses to a devastating disappointment. "Have a good night," I said simply, my voice still a thread, but now laden with a newfound resolve. I picked up my purse and, without looking back, walked toward the door. The silence that followed was deafening, a heavy vacuum that filled the room. I left the apartment to the sound of chairs scraping, of hushed, urgent voices, trying futilely to piece together the scraps of paper I had left behind. In the elevator, my legs trembled, a weakness spreading through my entire body. But my decision was made. If I was an annoying, unbearable old hag, then they would discover what they had lost with my absence. By the time I got home, the phone was already ringing insistently, its shrill cry breaking the silence of my loneliness. It was Michael, his voice desperate. "Mom, what were those papers?" We managed to piece some of it together. "It looks like it's about a property." I hung up without answering, the sound of my own ragged breath filling the emptiness of my apartment. If they wanted to know, they would have to find out for themselves, piece by piece, just like the fragments of my soul. I felt broken, but at the same time, an unknown strength began to sprout in my chest, a flame I didn't know I still possessed. What I had torn up at that dinner wasn't just paper. It was the remnants of an illusion, the promise of a family future that would never exist. And now, the consequences. The consequences would be unpredictable. The insistent ringing of the phone echoed in my dark living room, a shrill reminder of the turmoil I had left behind. It wasn't the first call, nor the second, but my son's voice, once so welcoming, now sounded with an urgency that pierced my soul. Each ring was a blow to my already fragile composure, an attempt to drag me back into the eye of the storm I had just created. I let it ring. His voice, distorted by distance and frustration, demanded explanations, but the words had run dry within me. The raw truth seemed harder to swallow than the lies disguised as kindness. I sat in my armchair, the darkness of the night outside mirroring the one that had settled inside me. The emptiness of the apartment felt deeper than ever. My cat, a blue-eyed Siamese named Sapphire, came to rub against my legs, her soft meow the only consolation in that moment of anguish. I petted her absently, the memories of the dinner still fresh, the cruel words of my daughter-in-law reverberating in my mind like a painful echo. The mansion. The mansion. It wasn't just a property. It was the realization of a dream, a gift from the heart for my son, an inheritance I had quietly received from my older sister, Helena, who passed away 2 years ago. Helena, with her wisdom and generosity, had always taught me the value of discretion, of kindness done in silence. She knew that I, with my sensitivity, often suffered in silence. The house, with its sprawling gardens and classic architecture that harked back to an era of elegance, was located in Lake Forest, one of the most exclusive suburbs, a true haven of peace and beauty. My intention was to surprise Michael and Jessica with it, a belated but grand wedding gift, a milestone for the start of a new phase in their lives, a phase I had hoped to share in, but not control. I had imagined the smile on his face, the gratitude, the warmth of a united family. But Jessica's words, they had torn not just the documents, but the web of hopes I had patiently woven. My gesture, once an act of selfless love, had transformed into a silent scream of pain and revulsion. The following days were a torture of phone calls and messages. First Michael, then Jessica, both begging for explanations, for a chance to understand what had happened. I didn't answer. I couldn't. My voice was choked, my thoughts a jumble. The pain was so intense it paralyzed me, preventing me from articulating anything but a silent lament. Through Laura, a mutual friend who kept abreast of family matters, I learned that they had, in fact, consulted a real estate agent. The fragments of the documents I had left, those little pieces of paper that fell on the dirty plates, had been enough to arouse their curiosity, their greed, the property's value. Laura confided in me with an apprehensive voice, was astronomical, enough to secure the financial future of the entire family, to provide a life of comfort and security. The news sent a shiver down my spine, a confirmation that my suspicions about my daughter-in-law's motives were correct. But the situation, already delicate, grew even more complicated. Laura, with her unwavering loyalty, brought me another piece of news, even more disturbing. My daughter-in-law had started spreading rumors, whispering to close family members that I was having mental health issues. The episode of the torn papers, she claimed, was irrefutable proof of my cognitive decline. She was constructing a distorted narrative of the facts, painting me as an unbalanced and vindictive old woman who had destroyed important documents out of pure spite, out of malice. With each passing day, I felt the web of slander tightening around me. My reputation, built so carefully over a lifetime of integrity and discretion, was being systematically destroyed by calculated lies and manipulation. Even worse, I learned she had consulted a lawyer to question my mental capacity and attempt to nullify any future will. Her motive was finally revealing itself in its entirety. Not just an aversion to my presence, but a calculated greed disguised as protection for my son, a protection that was, in reality, a way to control him and, by extension, control access to the family's assets. The revelation left me floored, a mixture of sadness and fury consuming me. My son, influenced by his wife's words, began to question my sanity. The visits stopped completely. When we met casually at family events, he treated me with a mixture of pity and embarrassment, a look that cut me deeper than any direct insult. His absence, his distance, was the deepest wound. For 2 weeks, I lived in painful isolation. The silence of my home was the sound of my loneliness. Close friends and family, once pillars of support, began to avoid me. The whispers about my supposed mental instability reached my ears through third parties, like distorted echoes of a reality that did not belong to me. The sense of abandonment was crushing, and the uncertainty of what was to come gnawed at me. I didn't know how to reverse the situation, how to unmask the lies, how to regain the trust of those I loved. My heart was heavy, and hope, a thin thread, seemed to be slipping away with each passing day. But in the midst of this darkness, a small flame of resilience began to flicker. I could not allow a false narrative to define the rest of my life. I could not allow an ambitious woman to destroy everything I had built, including my relationship with my son. The fight had just begun, and I knew I would need all my strength to face it. But the next step, the next move, was still a painful mystery, hanging over me like an imminent threat. The solitude, once a quiet companion, had become a suffocating weight. every morning upon waking, I felt the emptiness of my apartment like an echo of the absence that had settled into my life. The laughter of before, the lively conversations, the smells of coffee and cake that my son so enjoyed when he visited, all of it had become a distant, almost unreal memory. I tried to fill the time with my usual routines, tending to the small flower boxes on my balcony, reading my favorite novels, the long afternoons dedicated to sewing, a hobby that had always brought me peace. But not even these once pleasurable activities could muffle the constant hum of anguish. My mind would drift to what my daughter-in-law was doing, to the seeds of mistrust she was planting, and the image of my son, once so vibrant, now clouded by pity and embarrassment in his eyes, haunted me. One afternoon, while watering my orchids, the same ones Helena had taught me to care for with such affection, the phone rang. It was Clara, an old friend from high school, a woman of grit and sagacity who always knew how to read between the lines. Her voice, usually so full of life, was tinged with concern. "My dear," she began, her tone soft but firm, "there have been some things going around, and I don't believe a word of it. I've known you for over 50 years, and I know you have a heart of gold." Clara's words were a balm to my wounded soul, a reminder that not everyone had turned against me. She told me, with the delicacy of someone walking on eggshells, about the whispers circulating in our social circles, distorted stories, painting me as an eccentric and temperamental figure, someone who had suddenly lost their reason. Clara, however, was not one to be easily fooled. She had listened attentively, but with a healthy skepticism, to my daughter-in-law's concerns, as she strived to appear a victim of my supposed instability. My friend, with her sharp insight, noted the irony in my daughter-in-law's speech. "She talks about you with such exaggerated sweetness," Clara commented, her voice a little clearer now, "that it almost sounds like diluted poison. Something tells me that girl is not who she seems to be." Clara's observation brought me a mixture of relief and fear. Relief to have someone who saw the truth behind the facade, and fear to realize that my daughter-in-law's web of manipulation was even more elaborate than I had imagined. She wasn't just slandering, she was building an image, a character, to present herself as the hero of the story. The devoted daughter-in-law trying to cope with a difficult mother-in-law. The conversation with Clara was a turning point. It pushed me to see that I couldn't just hide and suffer in silence. I had to act, not just to clear my name, but to protect what was left of my family, especially my son, who seemed to be increasingly entangled in his wife's web. Clara offered to help, to be my eyes and ears in the outside world, since I felt unable to face people. "Don't you worry, my friend," she assured me. "We'll find out what this girl is up to. There's something very strange about this whole story, and I don't trust people who try too hard to convince you." Her words gave me a new lease on life, a spark of hope. However, with each passing day, the pressure mounted. My son's calls had ceased, but my daughter-in-law's became more insistent, her voice now tinged with a false concern, an insistence on helping me that bordered on a threat. She wanted to visit, wanted to talk about the incident, and I knew it wasn't out of kindness. It was to gather more information, to solidify her narrative that I was unhinged. The mere sound of my phone ringing sent shivers down my spine. I knew she was, somehow, monitoring me, and the feeling of being under surveillance was terrifying. She seemed to know when I was most vulnerable, when the loneliness gripped me tightest, and it was in those moments that her calls came, like spiders weaving their web. The final straw came when I received an official notice, a legal document with small, cold print, informing me of a petition to evaluate my mental capacity. My heart froze. My daughter-in-law had taken her scheme to the next level, seeking legal intervention to have me declared incompetent. The words conservatorship and guardianship danced before my eyes, turning into frightening monsters. I couldn't believe she would go so far. My hands trembled as I held the paper, and a silent but powerful fury began to build within me. It was no longer just about the mansion or my son. It was about my dignity, my autonomy, my very existence. I was not an annoying old hag, and certainly not a senile old woman. I was a woman with a sharp mind and a heart that, though wounded, still beat with strength. I looked at the notice, and a clear image formed in my mind. My daughter-in-law, with that false smile, celebrating her victory. But I would not allow it. I would not let her destroy me. War had been declared, and I was about to discover that the most effective weapons were not the loudest, but the quietest, and often the most surprising. And the first battle, I knew, would be deciding on my first move, something she would never expect. The legal notice, with its cold, impersonal letters, was a dagger plunged into my soul. The words, mental capacity evaluation, danced before my eyes, morphing into phantoms that threatened to devour my dignity, my history. The paper trembled in my hands, not from fragility, but from a contained fury I hadn't felt in a long time. It wasn't just my honor at stake, but my very identity. I, who had always prided myself on my sharp mind and my independence, was being reduced to a mere pawn in a cruel game of manipulation. The tears, which had once fallen in abundance, had dried up, replaced by an iron resolve. No, I would not allow it. I would not be defined by the lies of an ambitious woman. I called Clara, my voice choked but firm. She listened with the patience of a sister, the wisdom of a confidant. When I finished venting, a thoughtful silence hung on the line before she spoke. My dear, this woman knows no bounds, but you know me. I would never let something like this happen to you. Clara's words were a balm, a breath of fresh air in the midst of the storm. She calmed me, reminded me of my strength, of my ability to overcome. We won't do anything rash, but we won't stand still either, she declared, and in her voice, I heard not just support, but a plan forming. She offered to discreetly investigate her past, to unravel the history of my daughter-in-law, something my son, in his blind passion, had never noticed. Clara, with her network of contacts and her discreet manner, began to move. She had a nose for the truth, a keen intuition I had always admired. I, on the other hand, felt I needed to do my part. My first decision was to see Dr. Miller, my trusted physician for over 20 years, not as a sick patient, but as someone seeking a certificate of sanity. I explained the situation to her in general terms, without delving into the painful details of the family betrayal, just enough for her to understand the need for a full evaluation. Dr. Miller, a woman of empathy and professionalism, looked at me with a warmth that betrayed her genuine concern. Don't you worry, Eleanor, she said, holding my hand. We'll show them the strong, lucid woman you are. That visit, though tinged with a subtle sadness, brought me relief. It was a concrete first step, a small victory in the coming war. Meanwhile, my son's absence became an increasingly heavy burden. With every sunset, I found myself reliving moments with him, from his childhood when he ran through the house with a toothless grin, to his teenage years with their dilemmas and dreams. The memories were a bittersweet mix of love and longing. How could he have been so easily manipulated? That question gnawed at me. I knew he loved his wife, but love, as I had learned the hard way, can sometimes be blind. I refused to call him, to plead for his understanding. Pride, yes, but also the conviction that he needed to see the truth for himself. Any attempt on my part to prove my daughter-in-law's malice would be seen by him as an attack, as jealousy, feeding the narrative she was building. The weeks dragged on. Each day, a challenge. Each night a silent monologue with my own soul. But there was a faint hope, a flame that Clara kept alive. She called me periodically with small updates, asking for patience and promising that things would become clearer. "She has a pattern, my dear," Clara revealed in one conversation, her voice more serious. "A pattern of isolating the people close to the men she gets involved with. And it's something that has repeated itself in several places." Those words were a shock. Another piece in the puzzle of my daughter-in-law's manipulation. The malice was not just directed at me. It was a trait of her personality, a cold, calculated tactic. My daughter-in-law wasn't just trying to push me away out of spite. She was executing a plan. Clara's investigation continued, meticulous and silent, like a shadow. I began to gather my own documents, copies of bank statements showing the impeccable management of my finances, records of my properties, everything that could refute any claim of incapacity. I reviewed every detail, every paid bill, every investment. I wanted to be sure there were no gaps, no weak points she could exploit. I felt like a strategist on a battlefield, preparing my defenses as the enemy advanced. The anxiety was constant, but the determination was even greater. I was not a senile old woman, and I would prove it. The battle was not just for the mansion, but for my reputation, for my history, for my life. Then, one Sunday afternoon, as I was preparing a solitary cup of tea, the doorbell rang. My heart leaped. I wasn't expecting anyone. I opened the door and there she was, my daughter-in-law, with a smile even more forced than usual, and in her eyes a mixture of false sweetness and an almost predatory curiosity. "Eleanor, I came to see how you are," she said, and I knew this moment would be more than a courtesy visit. I knew she was there to inspect, to probe, to gather more ammunition for her silent war. And I, with a lump in my throat, but with a sharp mind, knew I would have to act with the utmost caution, for any slip-up could be fatal. The cat-and-mouse game was over. Now, we were face to face, and I knew she was about to make a move that could change everything. Her smile, so plastic and studied, stretched across her face, but her eyes, cold and calculating, inspected every detail of my apartment, every expression on my face. "Eleanor, I came to see how you are," she repeated, her honeyed voice dripping with false concern, and I felt a shiver. She wore an impeccable suit, her hair perfectly styled, as if posing for a magazine. The image of perfection, of the worried daughter-in-law, was constructed with a meticulousness that nauseated me. I invited her in, my body rigid, my senses on high alert. The aroma of the chamomile tea I had been preparing before she rang the bell now seemed to hold a touch of irony, a futile attempt at calm in the face of the brewing storm. We sat in the living room, the untouched tea between us. She began with generic questions about my health, about my activities. Her voice, once so unbearable, now seemed to me an instrument finely tuned for manipulation. I responded with monosyllables, maintaining a serene countenance, but inside, a whirlwind of emotions consumed me. I could feel her thirst for information, the way her eyes scanned the room, searching for any sign of imbalance, any sign of fragility. She seemed to be waiting for me to break down, to give in, to confirm the narrative she was so meticulously building about my supposed insanity. But I would not give her that satisfaction. "Eleanor, about those papers," she began, her voice lowering to a tone of false confidence. "Michael and I are very worried. They seemed important. Do you remember what they were?" The question was a dart, thrown with surgical precision. She wanted me to confirm the existence of the mansion's documents, wanted me to give myself away, to reveal my mistake. I looked her directly in the eye, and an almost imperceptible smile touched my lips. "Papers?" I questioned, with a feigned innocence that surprised even myself. "My dear, I tear up so many old papers around here. Old bills, drafts. Memory plays tricks on us sometimes, doesn't it? The response caught her off guard. Her eyes blinked, and for a brief moment, the mask of sweetness slipped, revealing a hint of irritation and frustration. She had expected a confession, an explanation, and I had given her an evasion so convincing it made her falter. She tried again, with a new tactic. But Michael said it looked like something about a property. Maybe he saw something important. Don't you remember saying anything about a large house? Her tone was almost inquisitive, but disguised as concern. I shook my head slowly, with a theatrical sigh. Oh, my son. He's always coming up with these ideas. It must have been one of his daydreams. Poor thing. Sometimes he dreams too big, don't you think? The irony of the situation was almost palpable. She, the manipulator, was being manipulated. With every question, I gave an answer that disarmed her, that left her with nothing to grasp. She was there to confirm my fragility, but I was presenting her with a wall of serenity and apparent confusion that blocked her advance. As the conversation dragged on, my phone vibrated silently in my cardigan pocket. It was a message from Clara. Valuable information on her past. Get ready. The web is more complex than we thought. The message gave me a new surge of energy, an injection of courage. I knew Clara was working tirelessly, and that soon, the truth would come to light. My daughter-in-law, realizing she wouldn't get the information she wanted, changed the subject, but not before casting a suspicious glance my way. Well, Eleanor, I have to go, but call me if you need anything. All right, we're always here for you. The words were empty, spoken with her mouth, but not with her heart. I knew she wasn't there to help me, but to make sure I was losing the battle. I walked her to the door, my expression unchanged. As I closed the door, I let out a breath I didn't realize I had been holding. My body relaxed, but my mind remained on alert. Her visit had been a trial by fire, and I felt that, somehow, I had won that round. But Clara's message, with its promise of revelations, echoed in my mind. The complex web intrigued and terrified me at the same time. I knew the truth might be more painful than I imagined, but I also knew it was the only way to free myself and, perhaps, to free my son. The evening wore on, and I felt exhausted, but with a strange feeling that something crucial was about to happen. Clara's next call would be decisive, and I could hardly wait to find out what she had unearthed from my daughter-in-law's past. What was this valuable information, and how would it fit into my dilemma, my suffering? The suspense enveloped me, and I knew there would be no peace until all the pieces of the puzzle were revealed. The silence that followed my daughter-in-law's departure wasn't one of complete relief, but of a tense truce. I knew the battle was far from over, but that small victory of not yielding to her probing gave me a breath of confidence. My hands, which had been trembling, were now steady as I picked up the phone and dialed Clara's number. I needed to know. I needed the information she had promised, the secrets hidden beneath my daughter-in-law's polished surface. Clara answered on the first ring, as if she had been waiting for my call. "Is she gone?" she asked, her voice soft but with a note of anticipation. "Yes," I replied, my voice still a bit hoarse from the tension. "And she got nothing from me." A sigh of satisfaction escaped Clara's lips. "I knew you could do it, my friend. You've always been stronger than you think." The conversation deepened. Clara began to narrate what she had discovered, and each word was a piece of ice falling on my already fragile heart. She had traced my daughter-in-law's past, uncovering a disturbing pattern in her previous relationships, in all of them, before marrying my son. The same strategy had been employed, a gradual estrangement of her partners from their families of origin, especially the closest female figures, like mothers and sisters. "She's a master of isolation," Clara explained, her voice serious. "It starts with little comments, insinuations that the partner's family is controlling, or that they don't understand the couple's relationship. Then, she becomes the bridge, the only channel of communication, distorting words and intentions until the estrangement is complete. My mind flashed back to memories of the past few months. My daughter-in-law's sudden unavailability for family gatherings, the subtle complaints about how I interfered too much with the grandchildren's upbringing, even though I only spoiled them with stories and cookies. Her glances that seemed to say, "You're the third wheel here." I had tried to ignore it, to justify it, but now, under the cold light of Clara's discoveries, it all made sense. It wasn't jealousy or misunderstanding. It was a meticulously executed plan. There was a story of one boyfriend who had completely cut off his mother to the point of not attending her funeral after the daughter-in-law had insinuated the mother was toxic and controlling. Another who sold a family asset to invest in a failed business, following her advice. Fortunately, there were no criminal records, but the emotional manipulation was evident and recurrent. The revelation left me in shock. I had always believed in the essential goodness of people, and this discovery of such cold, calculated malice opened my eyes to a much harsher reality. My son, my sweet, naive son, had fallen into a web she knew well. The pain for him mingled with a new wave of anger and determination. I wasn't just a victim. I was the next piece in her game. And there's more. "My dear," Clara continued, her voice now a little graver. "It seems her lawyer is a specialist in conservatorship cases. He has a history of using the emotional fragility of relatives to facilitate asset transfers." The news sent a chill down my spine. The legal notice wasn't just an empty threat. She was acting with intent and with specialized legal support. The conversation with Clara lasted for hours, each minute revealing a new aspect of the situation's complexity. I felt a mixture of gratitude and dread. Gratitude for having such a loyal and sharp friend, and dread for the web of lies and manipulation in which my son and I were entangled. Clara's information was gold, but how to use it? How to unmask someone so skilled at projecting an image of victimhood and virtue? The task seemed monumental. My reputation was tarnished, and my son, increasingly distant, seemed completely oblivious to his wife's true nature. He treated me with condescending pity, a look that mixed affection with a strange judgment, as if I were a petulant child who needed understanding, but not belief. The following days were spent digesting this information, trying to map out a strategy. However hazy, I needed proof, something irrefutable to show my son and the family the truth. But how to obtain it? How to confront such a cunning person? I felt trapped in a labyrinth where every exit seemed to lead to another dead end. The anxiety was a constant knot in my stomach. I barely slept, and my thoughts revolved around my daughter-in-law, her machinations, the way she had destroyed my family's peace. Then, one morning, I received an unexpected phone call. It was my son's lawyer, Mr. Davies, the same one our family had trusted for years. His voice was tense, serious. He informed me that he had been formally engaged by my daughter-in-law, on my son's behalf, to initiate the proceedings for my competency evaluation. He sounded uncomfortable, and I could sense a note of hesitation in his voice. "Eleanor," he said, "we need to talk. Something about this whole situation doesn't sit right with me, and I have a feeling Michael is being pressured." He asked to meet with me, urgently. The situation had escalated. The legal war had begun, and I knew time was running out. I had to act, but the uncertainty of what the lawyer knew, or what he would do, left me on a precipice, waiting for the next step. The ringing of the phone, which once sent shivers of anxiety down my spine, now echoed with a different melody, a note of cautious hope. My son's lawyer, Mr. Davies, a man in his late 40s with graying temples and a reputation for unshakable integrity, had called His voice on the phone was laden with a gravity that alarmed me, but also gave me a glimpse of hope that perhaps I was not alone in this battle. "Eleanor, we need to talk. Something about this whole situation doesn't sit right with me, and I have a feeling Michael is being pressured." He asked to meet with me urgently, and my heart, once squeezed by loneliness, felt a timid warmth, like a ray of sun in the midst of a storm. Mr. Davies's waiting room was a sanctuary of dark wood and stacked books, a welcome contrast to the impersonal coldness of legal notices. When he called me in, his expression was weary, but his eyes, behind thin-rimmed glasses, revealed a genuine concern. He offered me coffee, but I preferred tea, and as he prepared it, I could observe the hesitation in his movements, the way he chose his words with care. I sensed he was in a dilemma, caught between loyalty to a client and his own conscience. "Eleanor," he began, his voice low, almost a whisper, as he handed me the steaming cup. "I've known your family for many years. I represented your late husband, then your son, and this situation. It's not what it appears to be." He explained that although he was legally bound to follow my son's instructions, something didn't add up in my daughter-in-law's narrative. "She has been very insistent," he said, pausing, searching for the right word. "Her instructions are too specific, too detailed for someone who is just worried about a loved one's mental health." He told me that in his conversations with my son, he noticed a strange reluctance, a lack of conviction in his voice. My son seemed to be repeating a script rather than expressing his own genuine concerns. He seems distant, almost as if he's under some kind of influence. And when I tried to probe deeper, Jessica always intervened, controlling the narrative, downplaying my questions. Mr. Davies's revelation was not just a turning point, it was a beacon in the darkness. He couldn't breach his client's confidentiality, but his body language, his glances, the strategic pauses in his sentences, said much more than his words allowed. He advised me to gather all possible evidence of my sanity and competence. Dr. Miller is an excellent professional. A letter from her will carry weight, but we need more. Financial records, testimonies from friends and other family members who can attest to your lucidity, your ability to manage your life. He was giving me a map, an escape route. Then he leaned in a little closer, his voice even lower, almost inaudible. "Eleanor, I can't be explicit, but there was an occasion when I overheard her talking on the phone. She didn't know I was in the next room. She was talking about a plan, about how easy it would be to manage the assets once you were deemed incapacitated." A shiver ran down my spine. It was the proof I needed, a shocking glimpse of the cruelty and greed that motivated my daughter-in-law. The shock and pain of that revelation were overwhelming. My heart tightened at the thought that my son, even if unconsciously, was being used as a pawn in this sordid game. I looked at Mr. Davies, my eyes welling up, but with a new strength. "Thank you, Mr. Davies. Thank you so much." He nodded, a look of compassion on his face. "I will do what I can, within ethical bounds, to ensure that the truth prevails." Leaving his office, I felt the weight of my solitude had lessened considerably. The fight was still arduous, but now I had an unexpected ally and, more importantly, solid evidence of my daughter-in-law's true nature. I immediately called Clara, my voice vibrating with a mixture of indignation and hope. "Clara, you won't believe what I've discovered. Mr. Davies told me something that changes everything." My daughter-in-law's web was beginning to unravel, and I was ready to pull the threads until it disintegrated completely. But the question that haunted me was, how could I make my son see the truth without him feeling betrayed by me, or worse, by himself? The answer seemed even more complex than I could have imagined. The words of Mr. Davies echoed in my mind like a muffled scream, irrefutable proof of the cruelty surrounding me. The subsequent conversation with Clara was a mix of catharsis and planning. I told her, my voice choked with emotion, every detail, every insinuation from the lawyer, the veiled confession that revealed my daughter-in-law's greedy intent. Clara listened with her characteristic seriousness, and a heavy silence settled between us. "This woman is dangerous, my friend," she finally said, her voice filled with an indignation that mirrored my own. "And now that we know she has a lawyer specializing in this type of case, we need to be even smarter." We discussed the options, weighing the risks and rewards. Confronting my son directly seemed the most impulsive and, perhaps, the most counterproductive choice. He, in his blindness, might see my attempt as an attack on his wife, further proof of my instability. Her web of manipulation was so dense that I feared any sudden move could push him even further away. "We need something unquestionable," Clara suggested. "Something he can't ignore or twist. Something that comes from an outside source, not you or me." The idea made sense. The truth needed to emerge in a way that he discovered it for himself, without the interference of his already manipulated emotions. In the following days, the sense of urgency grew. My daughter-in-law's advances became bolder. I received an invitation for a family lunch at her house, supposedly to clear the air. I knew it was a trap, an opportunity for her to confront and humiliate me in front of my son and other close relatives she had manipulated. I declined, feigning illness. Her response came through a curt text message from my son, written in a tone that wasn't his. "Mom is isolating herself again. It's a shame she doesn't want what's best for us." Every word was a stab, a painful reminder of how far her influence had reached. My home, once a sanctuary, became a headquarters for planning and waiting. I reviewed my financial documents with obsessive care, organizing every statement, every proof of payment. Dr. Miller, in her kindness, had provided me with a detailed certificate of my full cognitive and mental capacity, a shield against the malicious accusations. I guarded it like a treasure, the tangible proof of my sanity. But the key element was missing, the irrefutable proof of my daughter-in-law's manipulation. Clara, tireless, continued her investigation. She had a contact in one of the law firms the daughter-in-law had consulted in previous relationships. It wasn't official information, but a whisper, a clue. It seems she has a pattern of advising her partners to make dubious investments, always under the pretext of improving the family's future, Clara revealed in a confidential phone call. And these investments always ended up badly. For the partners, of course. The information lit a spark. If she was using this tactic with my son, perhaps there were records, something that could be traced. The idea that my son might be being financially deceived, in addition to the emotional manipulation, filled me with a new kind of dread. My love for him, so pure and unconditional, clashed with the need to expose his wife, even if it hurt him. I saw him as a lost child, trapped in a predator's web, and the thought that I could save him gave me strength. But with each passing day, the distance between us grew, and I wondered if he still loved me enough to listen to the truth, or if her influence had already consumed him completely. The night wore on, and I was bent over old family albums, the photographs of a happy, smiling son, contrasting painfully with the image of a confused and manipulated man. I felt a tear run down my face, but it was not of despair. It was of a cold determination. I would not lose him, not to that woman. Suddenly, the doorbell rang, an unexpected sound in the middle of the night. My heart raced. Who could it be at this hour? A shiver ran down my spine. It couldn't be my son. He would have called. It couldn't be Clara. She always gave notice. Peeking through the peephole, I saw a familiar silhouette, but the expression on the person's face was different. Something I had never seen before. A desperate urgency. It was Laura. our mutual friend, and her eyes were wide with fear. She was pale, and her voice, when I finally opened the door, was a terrified whisper. "Eleanor, we need to talk. It's about your son. She's planning something very serious." What did Laura know? And why did the desperation in her eyes tell me that time was truly running out? Laura's figure, pale and wide-eyed, was an omen, a dark shadow cast across my doorway. The urgency in her expression and the fear in her voice were so palpable they struck me like a blow. "Eleanor, we need to talk. It's about your son. She's planning something very serious." The chill of the night, which had enveloped me in my solitary contemplation of family albums, was immediately replaced by a shiver of dread. I pulled the door open, drawing her inside, feeling the urgency of her words. Her body trembled slightly, and she seemed on the verge of collapse. I led her to the living room, offering her a glass of water, while my heart pounded in my chest. Laura sat down, her hands shaking as she held the glass. She took a few deep breaths, trying to control her own ragged breathing. I shouldn't be here," she began, her voice a hoarse whisper. "But I couldn't stay silent. I saw it. Eleanor, I saw and heard things that shocked me." Her eyes met mine, and in them, guilt and fear mingled with a newfound determination. She explained that she had been at my son and daughter-in-law's house for a small gathering of mutual friends, something Jessica had organized to keep up appearances. As Laura now understood, during the evening, while my daughter-in-law was distracted with other guests, Laura had needed to use the restroom and had mistakenly walked into the office, where Jessica's laptop was on. "I wasn't trying to snoop, Eleanor. I swear," Laura said, tears starting to stream down her cheeks. "But a window was open on the screen, and on it, there were transcripts and audio files." She paused, swallowing hard, struggling to continue. They were your conversations with her. They were edited clips, cut and pasted together to make you sound confused, unbalanced, as if you were losing your memory or your grasp on reality. My world spun. With every word from Laura, the image of my daughter-in-law, with her false smile and cold eyes, became even more monstrous. The legal notice, the conservatorship proceedings, it all fit into a diabolical plot. She wasn't just spreading rumors, she was fabricating evidence, material to destroy my reputation irreversibly. Laura continued, her voice now a thread of despair. She was showing them to her lawyer, on the computer, saying it was irrefutable proof of your instability, and that she was going to use it to go public, if necessary, to ensure you no longer had a voice in your son's life or in your own assets. She said she was going to crush you, Eleanor, that she would make sure no one ever believed a word you said again. Fury bubbled in my veins, a cold flame that burned within. It wasn't just the mansion, not just my honor. It was an attempt to erase my existence, to silence me completely, to reduce me to a pathetic, misunderstood figure. "My son, does he know about this?" I asked, my voice trembling, a sharp pain piercing my heart. Laura shook her head, her eyes welling with tears. "No, Eleanor, I don't think so." She spoke of it as if it were a secret, something he didn't need to know for his own good. She keeps him in a bubble, a world of lies. He believes he's protecting you, that he's acting in your best interest, by following what she says. The revelation was a double blow, my daughter-in-law's betrayal, and my son's manipulated innocence. He wasn't an accomplice. He was a victim, just as entangled in her web as I was. Laura's visit had been a watershed moment, a point of no return. My daughter-in-law's strategy was clear: to use the law and public opinion, armed with manipulated evidence, to completely discredit me. The story of the torn papers, so trivial in itself, was just the first act of a much larger and crueler play. I had to act, and fast, The conversation with Laura gave me the necessary impetus, the confirmation that I could no longer afford to be passive. I had to fight, not just for my dignity, but to protect my son from such a dangerous woman. As she left, Laura begged me to be careful, not to mention that she had told me, "She's ruthless, Eleanor, and I'm afraid of what she might do." I hugged her, gratitude and concern mingling in a whirlwind of emotions. As I closed the door, I felt that the web binding me was even tighter, but now I knew its structure. The puzzle was starting to come together, but the most important piece was missing: how to unmask her, how to prove the manipulation of the recordings without her knowing I was aware of her darkest plan. Time was running out, and with every second, the threat of having my voice and my life silenced became more real. The final battle was imminent, and I needed a plan, something that could turn the tables decisively before it was too late. The weight of Laura's revelations was almost unbearable. The image of the edited audio, of my voice being distorted to paint a picture of insanity, burned in my mind. The fury, once an ember, was now a blaze, fueled by the pain of seeing my son deceived and my reputation destroyed by such a calculated plot. I knew I had to act, and fast. Time was running out, and with every second, the possibility of my daughter-in-law executing her diabolical plan became more real. I sat in my armchair, the darkness of the night outside reflecting the turmoil within me, and began to devise a plan. I couldn't confront her directly without irrefutable proof, and certainly not my son, as he was still under her spell. I called Clara, my voice choked with emotion, but with a new determination. I told her everything Laura had revealed, the description of the manipulated audio, my daughter-in-law's intention to publicly discredit me. Clara listened in silence, and when I finished, a heavy sigh escaped her lips. "This woman is sick, my friend," she said, her voice full of disgust. "But this also gives us an advantage. Now we know exactly what she's using against you." The idea of having an advantage brought me a sliver of hope. If I knew her weapons, perhaps I could forge my own defenses. We discussed the possibility of an audio expert, someone who could analyze the recordings and identify the edits. Clara, with her network of contacts, promised to look for someone discreet and reliable. "We need someone who can attest to the manipulation, unquestionably," she emphasized. "And we need to do it before she uses this publicly." The complexity of the situation, however, frightened me. How could I obtain the audio? I couldn't break into her apartment, and my son would never give me access. It was a dead end, unless I could predict her next move. While waiting for news from Clara, anxiety consumed me. My nights were filled with nightmares, and the days were long and full of uncertainty. I felt trapped in a plot, a reluctant protagonist in a drama I had not chosen. But amidst this anguish, a new strength began to grow within me. I was not a helpless victim. I was a 70-year-old woman with a lifetime of experience, wisdom, and resilience. I had faced many challenges, and this would be no different. I would not let my daughter-in-law define me, or let her destroy the legacy of a lifetime of integrity. The turning point came unexpectedly. A week after Laura's visit, I received an email from Mr. Davies. The subject line was, "Urgent family meeting." My heart froze. The date was set for 2 days from now, at my son's house. I knew it was the moment my daughter-in-law had been planning, the stage where she intended to present her proof and discredit me in front of everyone. I felt an icy fear run down my spine, but also a spark of determination. This would be my chance. The chance to turn the tables. I called Clara, informing her of the email. "This is our opportunity," I said, my voice firmer than I expected. "She's going to present the audio, and we'll be ready." Clara, with her sharp intelligence, agreed. She had already found a forensic audio expert, a discreet professional who worked remotely. I'll arrange for him to be on standby. My friend, you need a recorder, a discreet one, and try to record everything that happens at that meeting. Every word. The idea of recording the meeting sent a chill through me, but I knew it was necessary. I needed proof of her manipulation, and perhaps even her veiled confession. The search for a discreet recorder led me to a small electronics shop downtown, an old place with the smell of dust and circuits. I found a tiny, almost unnoticeable recorder that could be hidden in my purse. As I bought it, I felt a strange mix of determination and melancholy. I was preparing for a battle, not a family reunion. The night before the meeting was long and tense. I replayed the plan in my mind, every detail, every possible scenario. My son, my son. I knew he would be there, confused, perhaps even a little hostile, and the thought of seeing him like that tore me apart. But I knew that the truth, however painful, was the only path to his freedom. I loved him too much to leave him in the clutches of such a treacherous woman. The next day, on my way to my son's house, the recorder in my purse seemed to pulse, a metal heart holding the hope of justice. I felt a mixture of apprehension and a courage I didn't know I possessed. I was entering the lion's den, but I was not unarmed. On the contrary, I carried the truth, and the truth, I knew, was the most powerful weapon of all. As I rang the doorbell, I took a deep breath, preparing myself for what was to come. My daughter-in-law's face, as she opened the door, wore a triumphant smile, but in my eyes, I felt a flame of determination. The final battle was about to begin, and I was ready to fight for my voice, for my dignity, and above all, for my family. Ringing the doorbell, I felt a surge of adrenaline, a mix of fear and the courage that the urgency of the situation had awakened in me. My daughter-in-law's smile as she opened the door, that well-rehearsed and now transparent smile, did not intimidate me. Her eyes, which once seemed mere instruments of scrutiny, now shone with a disguised satisfaction, as if she were already savoring victory. I entered the living room to find a carefully orchestrated scene. It wasn't just my son who was there. There were also some more distant relatives, aunts and cousins I rarely saw, seated in an almost ceremonial fashion. Their gazes, upon seeing me, were a mixture of curiosity, pity, and a silent judgment that wounded me deeply. My son sat beside her, a troubled expression on his face, his eyes fixed on the floor, avoiding mine. I could feel the weight of the manipulation on him, the confusion she had sown in his heart. I sat in an empty armchair, maintaining an erect posture, my chin held high, the tiny recorder hidden in my purse, silently activated. The atmosphere was dense, charged with an almost palpable tension. My daughter-in-law, in an overly sweet voice, began to speak. "Well, everyone, I've gathered you all here today because there's something very delicate we need to discuss. It's about Eleanor's health." She cast a theatrical look of concern in my direction, which I ignored. "As you know, Michael and I love Eleanor very much, and we worry about her." My throat tightened, but I forced myself to remain calm, remembering the words of Clara and Mr. Davies, patience and strategy. She continued, weaving her narrative with skill, describing my supposed mental deterioration with language that sounded genuine to unsuspecting ears. She spoke of the confusion with the papers, of my recent isolation, of how I had become difficult to deal with. Each word was a stab, but I let her speak, observing the reactions of the others. Some relatives nodded, others looked at me with sadness, some with evident discomfort. My son, however, remained with his gaze fixed on the floor, his hands clenching his knees, an image of internal conflict that broke my heart. Then she signaled to my son, who, hesitantly, got up and went to a side table where a laptop was set up. She picked up a remote control and smiled, a smile I knew was one of triumph. "So that everyone can understand the gravity of the situation, Michael and I would like to share some conversations we've had with Eleanor. This is for her own good, so we can help her in the best way possible." My heart leapt. This was it, the manipulated audio. I felt sweat trickle down my back, but I kept my expression impassive. She clicked play, and the room filled with my own voice, but in a way that sent a shiver down my spine. They were clips, my voice, often in a confused tone, asking about mundane things taken out of context, or my own phrases that were isolated, sounded like memory lapses. What in a normal conversation would be just a pause for thought, or a question repeated out of distraction, was presented here as evidence of cognitive decline. In one clip, my voice sounded hesitant. I don't remember where I left my keys. My daughter-in-law had cut the part where I immediately laughed and said, "Oh, found them. They were in my coat pocket, as always." But here, it sounded like proof of senility. Murmurs began among the family members. Some looks turned to me, filled with pity, others with confirmation of her narrative. My son, upon hearing the clips, lifted his head. His eyes, finally, met mine. And in them, I could see not just confusion, but a hint of doubt, a flicker of questioning he was trying to hide. He seemed disturbed, torn between what he was hearing and what his heart perhaps still knew about me. But my daughter-in-law didn't give him time to reflect. She quickly stopped the recording. "As you can see, it's a delicate situation, and that's why we're already in contact with a lawyer to ensure that Eleanor receives the best care and that her assets are managed securely for her own benefit." I knew it was time to react, not with fury, not with despair, but with the serenity that had always characterized me, and now with the intelligence of someone who was one step ahead. I brought my hand to my purse, feeling the recorder, and took a deep breath. I looked at each of the people present, my eyes meeting theirs, one by one. When my gaze landed on my son, a new kind of pain hit me. He had allowed this. He had let himself be carried away, but I also saw in him the seed of doubt, the opening I needed. "My dear," I said, my voice calm, but with an authority that surprised everyone, including her. "Are you certain those recordings are complete?" She blinked, visibly taken aback by my composure. "Of course they are, Eleanor. They are clips that show the reality of the situation." I smiled, a genuine smile this time, of someone holding a winning card. "And would you have any objection if we asked an audio expert to analyze them, just to be sure there hasn't been any editing?" The color drained from her face, and the silence in the room was deafening. I knew I had hit a nerve, and the game, from that moment on, would change for good. The silence that settled in the room after my words was heavier than any shout, a vacuum that sucked the air from everyone present. My daughter-in-law's victorious smile vanished, replaced by a frightening pallor. Her eyes, once calculating, now danced with a mixture of shock and uncontrollable dread. She tried to compose herself, an almost instinctive reflex of her manipulative nature. An expert? But why, Eleanor? That's absurd." "I already said they're just real clips, just to show everyone how much we need to take care of you." Her voice, once sweet and honeyed, now sounded shrill, almost hysterical, revealing the crack in her facade. My son, who until then had been petrified, lifted his head. His eyes, which had avoided mine, now stared at me with an intensity I hadn't seen in a long time. The doubt he had tried to hide, the flicker of questioning, now flared into a spark of suspicion. He looked at his wife, then at me, confusion written all over his face. The seed of truth I had planted was beginning to sprout in his heart. The other family members, previously inclined to believe my daughter-in-law's narrative, also seemed disturbed. The whispers started again, but this time they were of uncertainty, of a new curiosity about the integrity of the situation. I kept my gaze fixed on her, a thread of determination in my eyes. If the recordings are as real and complete as you claim, my dear, then an expert would have no problem confirming it, would they? On the contrary, it would only reinforce your genuine concern. Unless there's something to hide. The last words came out with a calculated calm, a subtle poison that hit her squarely. She opened her mouth to respond, but no sound came out, only a gasp for air. Her body, once so controlled, was now rigid, her fists clenched. The mask of the worried daughter-in-law had completely fallen away, revealing the calculating woman behind it. My son, noticing the drastic change in his wife's demeanor, intervened, his voice a little hoarse. "Mom, what? What do you mean by something to hide?" He looked at me with a mixture of pleading and desperation, as if searching my eyes for an answer to the turmoil brewing in his mind. This was my chance, not to attack, but to sow more doubt, to clear a path for the truth. "My son," I said, my voice soft but firm, "I believe that the truth, no matter how painful, always comes to light, and in situations as delicate as this, transparency is essential. If there are recordings, let them be whole, without cuts, without edits, so that the truth can be fully understood. Anything less than that is manipulation." The word manipulation echoed in the room, and my daughter-in-law's expression hardened. She shot me a look of pure hatred, a veiled threat that made my blood run cold. But I didn't look away. She knew that I knew. She knew her web was about to be undone. Before she could react, Mr. Davies, who was present at my request, as I had already informed him of the meeting's nature and my plans, stood up. With his calm, professional voice, he added, "I agree with Eleanor. In cases like this, where an individual's mental capacity is being questioned and recordings are involved, it is standard legal practice to request a forensic audio analysis to ensure the authenticity and integrity of the evidence. It would be in the interest of all parties, and especially Michael, to ensure that the basis for these allegations is irrefutable." Mr. Davies's intervention was the final blow. The authority in his voice, the legal weight of his words, completely destabilized my daughter-in-law. She looked at her husband, then at the family members, who were now watching her with growing suspicion. Her victim narrative was disintegrating before everyone's eyes. She looked like a cornered animal, her eyes flashing with anger and desperation. My son, with a lump in his throat, looked at her, and I saw the realization dawning in his eyes, the pain of perception, the betrayal revealing itself. He loved her, but now he was seeing, or beginning to see, the shadow of the truth. Then she made a sudden move. She shot up from her chair, knocking it over with a crash, and pointed a trembling finger at me. "This is all a lie. She's making all of this up. She's an old woman who doesn't know what she's doing. She's manipulating you." Her voice was a scream, a desperate attempt to turn the tables, to blame me, to sow discord. But it was too late. The desperation in her voice, the lack of control, was more eloquent than any confession. My son stood up, his eyes fixed on his wife, an expression of profound disillusionment on his face. "Enough," he said, his voice choked but with an authority that surprised me. "We need to stop this." The room was in a tense silence, everyone watching the scene unfold. My daughter-in-law, her face red with fury, took a step toward me, her eyes like flames. I felt a chill, a premonition that she was about to do something irrevocable, something that would reveal her true face once and for all. And I, with my heart pounding, prepared for what was to come, knowing that this was the moment of greatest tension, the point of no return, where the truth would finally explode, for better or for worse, destroying everything in its path. The air in the room was heavy, thick with the tension emanating from my daughter-in-law. Her eyes, once burning with fury, now seemed to carry a layer of desperation, a cornered beast ready for one last attack. She took a step toward me, her fist clenched, and for a moment, fear gripped me. What would she do? Scream? Try to strike me? My life of elegance and discretion had never prepared me for a scene like this. But before she could take the final step, my son intervened, placing himself between us. "Enough," he repeated, his voice now firmer, though still laced with pain. His eyes, once blind, now shone with a painful clarity, the understanding of what was happening, the revelation of the true nature of the woman he loved. My daughter-in-law stopped abruptly, as if her husband's invisible barrier was impassable. She looked at him in disbelief, then at me, and for a brief instant, I saw defeat in her eyes, the realization that her web had been undone. In a fit of rage and despair, she let out a shrill cry that echoed through the room. "You don't understand. She's a manipulative old woman. She always wanted to keep me away from you, Michael. She never accepted me." The words, uttered with uncontrolled anger, were the veiled confession I needed. She didn't see me as a mother-in-law. She saw me as an obstacle, a rival. My son turned to her, the expression on his face a mixture of shock and disappointment. "You did this? You actually doctored the recordings? You tried to discredit my mother?" His voice was choked, barely able to contain his emotion. She tried to deny it, stammering excuses, but the words no longer held any power. The mask had fallen, and the truth, raw and painful, was there, exposed for all to see. The family members present, once divided, now watched the scene with a mixture of disgust and embarrassment. The whispers ceased, replaced by a heavy, condemning silence. Mr. Davies, with his characteristic calm, intervened again. "Jessica, the tampering of evidence and attempts to discredit an individual's mental capacity are serious offenses with significant legal implications. Unless you can prove the authenticity and integrity of these recordings, which seems unlikely, the case against Eleanor will be dismissed, and the consequences for you could be substantial." The lawyer's words, delivered with the coldness of the law, hit her like a bucket of cold water. She looked at him, her eyes empty of hope, realizing the gravity of the situation. My daughter-in-law, without another word, just shook her head, a gesture of defeat. She turned and left the room, her hurried footsteps echoing down the hall to the door. The sound of it slamming shut reverberated in the silence, an abrupt end to her presence in that home. My son, with a deep sigh, sat back down, his head in his hands, visibly shaken. The other family members, one by one, rose and approached me, some with apologies, others with looks of solidarity. "Eleanor, I'm so sorry I ever doubted you," said a distant cousin, her eyes welling with tears. "I should have known you would never do something like that." I reassured them, my voice still a little shaky, but with a serenity that surprised me. The pain was still there, but the sense of justice, of having my truth restored, was a balm. Mr. Davies informed me that, given the clear evidence of manipulation and my daughter-in-law's abandonment of her claim, the proceedings to evaluate my mental capacity would be dropped. He also assured me that if there were any further attempts by her to defame me, he would act to protect my name and reputation. After everyone had gone, only my son and I remained. He lifted his head, his eyes red and swollen, and a sob escaped his lips. "Mom," he said, his voice cracking, "I divorced her this morning." The words hit me with unexpected force. Though I knew it was the right path, his decision, made in the midst of such pain, saddened me. He continued, "I can't live with someone capable of such cruelty towards you. I was a fool, Mom. I let her blind me to who you really are." Tears streamed freely down his face, tears of regret, of pain, but also of a newfound liberation. He then looked at me, his eyes fixed on mine, the question hanging in the air. "But Mom, what were those papers you tore up?" At that moment, facing my broken son, I saw not my revenge, but his redemption. The pain of seeing him manipulated for so long transformed into a deep compassion. I had fought, not just for myself, but for him. The truth had been revealed, and now the rebuilding could begin. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of that night slowly dissipate. It was time to heal the wounds, to mend the bonds, to begin again. At that moment, facing my broken son, the words that had been stuck in my throat for weeks finally found their way out. The pain in his eyes was a mirror of my own, but also a sign of his liberation. "My son," I began, my voice thick with emotion. "Those papers, they were the deed to a mansion." His eyes widened in shock, and he took a deep breath, as if trying to absorb the magnitude of what I was revealing. "A property I quietly inherited from your Aunt Helena 2 years ago. My intention was to give you the house as a surprise wedding gift, a new beginning for you both." With each word, the understanding of what had happened, of what he had almost lost because of the manipulation, deepened on his face. His expression was one of such profound regret that it cut me to the soul. "Mom, forgive me for doubting you," he pleaded, his eyes misty, reaching his arms out to me. "I was a fool. I let her blind me to who you really are." In that embrace, which held me with a strength I hadn't felt in years, I felt the weight of months of suffering dissipate. It was an embrace of forgiveness, of reconciliation, of a love that had been tested and had, finally, prevailed. The tears that came were not of sadness, but of a deep and painful release. That hug was not just a reunion of bodies, but of souls, of a connection that had seemed lost forever. The next morning, with the Sunday sun bathing the city, we went together to the lawyer's office. I had kept certified copies of the original documents in a safe deposit box, a precaution that now proved to be a salvation. The look of shock and disbelief on his face was even greater when he saw the intact papers, the unquestionable validity of the property. There, before the coldness of legal documents, he realized the magnitude of what we had almost lost, not just a valuable property, but our relationship as mother and son, the most precious treasure I possessed. The legal formalities, which in other circumstances would have seemed tedious, became a ritual of renewal. Each stamp, each signature, a step toward healing. 3 weeks after that terrible dinner, we walked together through the lush gardens of the mansion that now officially belonged to him. The gentle breeze caressed my face, and the scent of the roses, which I planned to cultivate in the garden, filled my lungs with a sense of peace. The silence, once a sound of loneliness, was now filled with the sound of our footsteps, our breathing, our renewed presence. We decided to make it our family home, a place where we could rebuild our relationship away from toxic influences, a sanctuary of love and truth. My son, with his hands dirty from the soil, tended to the rose bushes, and I watched him, my heart overflowing with gratitude and hope. Today, watching my son care for the roses, I see in him a transformed man, more mature, more aware. The experience, as painful as it was, taught him about the true nature of people, about the value of loyalty, and about the importance of listening to one's heart. I realized that sometimes the cruelest words can be the catalyst for revealing necessary truths. The pain I felt at that door was real, but it was also the beginning of our liberation from a person who was slowly poisoning us. The mansion now echoes with genuine laughter, honest conversations, and the true love between a mother and son, exactly as it always should have been. I learned that dignity is not something given or taken, but something one defends. I learned that the truth, even when it hurts, is the only path to true freedom, and above all, I learned that a mother's love, no matter how tested, is an unshakable force, capable of overcoming the greatest adversities. Life, with its twists and turns, presents us with challenges that seem insurmountable, but it is in overcoming these obstacles that we discover our true strength and the beauty of human connection. My journey was one of suffering, but also of a profound and transformative triumph. And today, looking to the future, I feel a peace that once seemed unattainable, a new chapter, written with the inks of truth and unconditional love.